Think about how just to watch how the word hero comes up in the culture and the news, and of course, this was yesterday's paper before the College World Series final game, and just really interesting to read about heroic moments. What's so interesting about it is that one of my former students at CPA is the catcher, Philip Clark. So, and I've kind of kept up with him after he graduated. And it's been just interesting to watch his progression as a young man into sort of the fire and the trial of something like this and all that it requires of you. So I've been able to watch, we've been watching them kind of go through the whole series, and really from sort of the end of the regular season on into the playoffs. Really started watching them in the playoffs, and then we got invited down to Hawkins Field. I don't know if y'all ever the watch party. It was actually really cool. So we kind of just took it all in. So I wanted to just note that in the news about hero, and again, just keep your eyes open to how that word is being used and what it's being used for, and the word just kind of comes up so much, and not just in the movies. It just comes up kind of everywhere. So with that, I want to just again review where we are. So if you'll go to page 209 in the back again of the diagram, we're going to go through chapter 7. So again, this is a little construct. All diagrams have their limitations, but hopefully this one at least gives a somewhat of a picture, somewhat of a roadmap. Chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4 were all about the call to the heroic, sort of looking at the heroic as something way off in the distance that we want. But as we chase false glory in chapter 3, we come to that sort of breaking point. We go, I don't know how I constructed my life, but this didn't go anywhere. Interesting enough, I just talked to a man yesterday. He's in his mid-30s. I usually call this the quarter-life crisis. And, they've been out into the washing machine of the world, as I've called it, for about 15 years. And the way they sort of constructed their life that they thought was going to get them to where they thought they were going to go, where they thought they should go in their lives, which is always this upward climb, at some point fails. And he was telling me about his own crash and burn just yesterday. And it's this is kind of where every man kind of, comes into this point, and it's a turning point, and you have a chance to say, no, I see something really radically wrong. Okay, God, what now? Or you can just sort of keep doing the same foolish stuff. And this is a man who said, no, I'm going to make a turn. And he's describing that turn for me. And that turn is kind of what that little turn is: failure, I am no hero. And then the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about following the way of Jesus, about who he is as the great hero, and about him being the great coach through the Holy Spirit. Like, what is that, really? What does that look like? And how does that show itself in the great stories? And how is that going to make us into men? So what I want to do today is start talking about what sort of path does Jesus lead us into when he starts coaching us. And the path he leads us into is inevitably one of entering death. It's the exact opposite of what we thought where the heroic was. We think it's up there, and the Lord is going to take us in a very different direction. So that's where we're going to go today. So I want to talk about the idea of initiation. So, and this is where I want to start. The chapter is called Initiation by Death. And I want to start by talking just briefly in general about initiation. Initiation is not just something for fraternities. Initiation happens to us at small levels all the time. It's when we move into some experience we've never had before. And then at that experience, there's a facing of the unknown. We don't know what it's going to be like. A facing of the fear, and sometimes along with that, a facing of pain, and then in some really extreme cases, even a facing of death. Now, if you've ever gone into surgery, a major surgery, you know exactly what I'm talking about, particularly if it was surgery for the first time. That's a classic case of initiation. This has happened to all of us at multiple levels, and echoes of what I call the true initiation. I spoke some about my stories of initiation in the book. I want to tell briefly one that's not in the book. but it was my initiation to whitewater rafting. Okay, so I was 19 or 20. I was at Duke University, and our friends said, let's go whitewater rafting on the New River, which is a classic river in West Virginia that's still very active in terms of whitewater rafting. And he said, it's a great, great ride. And he goes, we'll do the 3-hour one. And the 3-hour one took us on a bunch of Class 3 and Class 4 rapids, which are like you really get some really good white water. And then there's a Class 5, if you know anything about whitewater rafting. Class 5 rapids are start to be a really dangerous rapid. Like you just have to use extreme caution. The Class 6 is usually called, you can't go down it. You can't navigate it, and usually somebody's died on it, has tried to. Class 1 and 2 are basically, it's not really white water. It's more like, just very either slow. Say it again.
A nice current.
It's a nice current. That's the one you get in your tube and you just float, So the whitewater rafting, they have these class rapids. So there were a bunch of 3, 4, and I remember there was 1, 5. So the guide was great, and he was just telling us all about this stuff, and there were 6 of us in there, or 7, I don't remember exactly. But we were going down there, and then we got to, we got to some Class 3, then we got to some Class 4s, and those were just so much fun. We were just, and when I first started, I can remember feeling some level of anxiety. It's like, what is this going to be like? What is this going to be? Like, I've never done this before. Like, am I going to be able to just, as I got into it, it's like, oh, I can do, this is pretty good. He's coaching us. Remember from last week? He's coaching us how to navigate, how to paddle, to use our paddles, how to maneuver. And so we're able to get through these rapids, and we're having some really great success and having some fun. And so my fear's kind of gone down a bit. I've kind of gotten into it a bit. And then we come to the Class 5 rapid. And he goes, now here's how it works. He goes, there's 3 class, as I remember, there's 2 Class 4 rapids that we come pretty quickly, and right after that we have to get set up really pretty quickly because there's the Class 5. And the Class 5 is called double Z. And it's called double Z because you have to make literally a movement in the water around these rocks that looks like a double Z pattern, like 2 Z's on top of each other. And he said, here's the way we're going to do it. Usually most rafters go in it forward, and then they have to make these jagged turns very quickly. He goes, but I've been working on doing it differently, and I've tried it, and it's worked so well. We're actually going to go in backwards. When we go in backwards, it's so much easier to flip the raft for the first turn. So we were like, sure, go for it. So we were coming, he goes, let's start turning, and all of a sudden his voice level raised. He goes, turn quicker, 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 quicker. And all of a sudden, it was like chaos erupted. And what happened was either the current was faster than he thought, or he had misjudged when to start turning, because we didn't get all the way around. We went into that rapid sideways, which is the worst possible position, because you're at the mercy of the river. And what happened was utterly terrifying, because all of a sudden we got pinned up on this rock. And the rock, literally the water was pushing us up the side of this rock, and at some point it was going to flip us over. And when we got up there, he was yelling and screaming and madly trying to get us off this rock. And then one of the guys fell out and was only hanging on by the rope. We were trying to get him up, and the next thing you know, the water slid us off the rock finally, and then we were totally out of control. And then we banged into another rock. And he was madly trying to get us, turned around enough to where we wouldn't find ourselves up on another rock, perched like that. We finally made it through after some more yelling and screaming, and we finally got that man who had fallen out. We got him back in. We finally got out, and he put us in a little back eddy, and he just explained to us. First of all, he profusely apologized, for the mistake. We were all shaking. It was so, I can't tell you this moment of just terror. And then he dropped the bomb on us, and he said, well, I want y'all to know, he goes, my terror happened because a kayaker went down this rapid last year and went in sideways and got pinned under a rock and died, drowned. And at that moment, I can remember this sense of nausea, it was probably the adrenaline all going into my stomach, but this sense of nausea We were going to eat lunch. It's like I had no hunger, just like I wanted to get off the river. Interestingly enough, 30 years later, I took a group of students. For a totally different reason, we ended up on the New River. Guess where I had to go down Double Z again? And interestingly enough, I had to face the old fear again. Interestingly enough, the water was at a very different level, and the rapid was actually very easy to negotiate. But I use that story because for me, that was my initiation of the whitewater rafting. I did survive that Double Z. I went back and whitewater rafted other rivers, but something happened to me on that river. It's like I walked through something that really changed me, that etched something into me. I was initiated into the world, the dangers and the joys of whitewater rafting. I learned to really respect the water because of it. Now, this initiation happens to us on countless times as we grow from boys into men, but all of these initiations are simply echoes of the true initiation, or the truest initiation, which is our initiation from boyhood into manhood. And ancient cultures, most of you all probably read about male initiation, always had these rites, and they always involved facing the unknown, facing fear, and facing even death. Some of it was enduring a wound. Some it was like, you had to hunt and kill something that was very, very dangerous. So it was some trial or multiple trials that you had to go through. And through that, the community of men would then embrace you and said, you've now become a man. And somewhere along the line, in our culture, particularly in the Industrial Revolution, if you think about it, boys were literally attached to their fathers and learned from their fathers or grew with their fathers, and that was sort of an initiation, even if there were no initiation rites then. But somewhere along in the Industrial Revolution, and particularly as we got into the technological revolution, boys were separated from their fathers. And if you think about it, what happened was boys didn't grow up with their fathers. Boys, probably from ages 3 or 4, went to school and the fathers went to work. Now you have to understand that's a cultural shift that is actually it's an anomaly in human history. And because of that, we are literally, one of the bleed out effects of that is and everybody speaks about this now, this crisis in masculinity. Well, this has just been growing for decades. And we're now seeing sort of the fallout. My first clue as to how men long to be initiated was doing this by cross-country camp. And I spoke about it a little bit in the book. And I did this camp I was trying to think of some out-of-the-box experience for my young men to begin training. And I got the idea from a coach, a well-known coach at Brentwood Academy at that time. And he gave me some of the ideas, and I sort of changed some of the things that I did with it. But basically, I constructed a training sequence where they would run twice, bike, and swim every day. And we would do a mini triathlon at the end. And it was rigorous. And for most of these young men, it's literally the most rigorous thing they've ever been through. And, at the end of it, they were just utterly, completely spent. And, some of them would complain, or this is so hard, and at the end, it was this elation of finishing, and then they couldn't wait to come back the next year. And it took me a long time to figure out, how could something be so hard be something that draws them? And it's because I had set up an initiation into the world of endurance, physical endurance. And it's something that they both hated and loved. Because they walked through, they faced the fear, they faced the unknown, and if you know anything about the sport of running, it's something unique about it. It pushes, you're asked to push to such a way that you literally expend everything by the end. And because of that, you have to face a level of pain, and you have to face literally what feels like death, like I'm going to die. That aerobic distress, as the sports physiologists call it. And it was in that facing of that and walking through that, they really felt that was a benchmark. And there was, I did it by myself, and then another assistant coach joined me. Just the two of us, with this community of men that would sort of celebrate the benchmark with them. So much confusion And the crisis of masculinity in our culture comes from this feeling that so many men have of being uninitiated. They have this sort of, they can't put words to it, but it's like something is just wrong. I'm not where I should be. I don't feel what I should be, what I should be feeling. And all that's left of our initiation rites, as far as I know, in general, and there's some others, but the biggies that I think of that in general boys consider are getting a driver's license the first time you get drunk and the first time you have sex. And those are pitifully insufficient on so many different levels. Besides the fact there's no community of men to celebrate the benchmark in general. There's no coaching in general. Now I want to take up this theme of initiation. I want to just leave that cultural piece to the side because that's not really what I want to address today. That's just the big picture of all this. That is a whole other issue. But where I want to go is our own initiation in terms of men and how that may happen with Jesus. And I want to bear down on that by talking about initiation in the great stories. All the great stories and myths have this idea that an older man a coach, as I call it, a mentor, somebody comes and takes a boy or a young man and he initiates them into the ways of the heroic. And if you remember the Matrix last week, who was the coach? It was Morpheus. And he was literally mentoring Mr. Anderson or Neo into who he really was and training him in it. And he was initiating him in. And in the initiation process, he had to progressively move into facing things that were unknown, facing that were fearful. It was trials because he was trying to prepare him for what's going to come down the road. And one of the arcs of all the great stories is that there's this final ordeal that the hero has to go through where he literally has to, in some cases, really face death. But because of his training and because of his mentor, he remembers what he's learned and he pushes through and he lets himself go for the sake of the quest. You know, if the story is to have a happy ending, that's how it goes. Now, what I want to watch for a few minutes is another classic initiation sequence. And it needs no introduction. I'm just going to roll it. And I want you to watch not only the coaching piece, but I want you to watch the initiation piece of facing fear, facing the unknown, and facing death. Okay, here we go. Some of y'all probably know what this is.
Look, I'm sure it's delicious. I just don't understand why we can't see Yoda now.
Patience! With a Jedi, it is time to eat as well!
How far away is Yoda? Will it take us long to get there?
Not far. No, they're not far. Patience, soon you will be with him. I will. Why will she become Jedi?
Mostly because of my father, I guess.
Huh? Father? Powerful Jedi was he. Powerful Jedi.
Oh, come on. How could you know my father? You don't even know who I am. No, I don't even know what I'm doing here. We're wasting our time.
I cannot teach him. The boy has no patience.
You will learn patience.
Much anger in him. Like his father.
Was I any different when you told me?
He's not ready.
Yoda. I am ready. Ben, I can be a Jedi. Ben, tell him I'm ready.
Ready, are you? What knows? Ready. For 800 years have I trained Jedi. I don't come to what I keep one who is to be trained. A Jedi must have the deepest commitment. Number most serious mind. This one, a long time have I watched. All his life as he looked away to the future, to the horizon. Ever his mind on where he was. What he was doing. Adventure. Excitement. A Jedi craves not these things. You are reckless.
So was I, if you remember.
He is too old. Yes, too old to begin the training.
But I've learned so much.
Will he finish what he begins?
I won't fail you. I'm not afraid.
You will be. You will be.
Okay, and then we'll cut to this scene.
Jedi strength flows from the Force, but beware of the dark side. Anger, fear, aggression. The dark side of the Force are made. Easily they flow, quick to join when they fight. If once you start down the dark path, forever will dominate your destiny. Consume you it will, as it did Obi-Wan's apprentice.
Vader. Is the dark side stronger?
No. Is here more seductive?
But how will I know the good side from the bad?
You will know when you're calm, at peace, passive. A Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, never for attack.
But tell me why I can't...
No, there is no why. Nothing more will I teach you today. Clear your mind of questions.
There's something not right. I feel cold.
Please. Be strong. The dark side of the Force. A domain of evil it is. And you mustn't go.
What's in there?
Only what you take with you. Your weapons. You will not need them.
Let's stop it there. In the Star Wars myth, a Padawan was somebody who entered the training to become a Jedi. That's where Luke is. And he asks Yoda, train me. And Yoda says, no. You got too much anger in you, too much aggression. And remember, he goes, oh, I'm not afraid. He goes, oh, you will be. And then the sequence starts, the next sequence. And he's like going through the training. He's like, trying to understand, listen to Yoda, go through these physical tests. And then, of course, the real test is coming. And it's what's interesting. He goes, what's in there? And he goes, death, the dark side. And then Yoda says, only what you take with you is in there. What's in there is only what you take with you. And Luke thought it was like, oh yeah, you don't want me to take my weapons. No, I'm taking my weapons. What he's going to face is himself. And in this sort of mirage, vision, whatever you want to call it in the Star Wars myth, he sees Darth Vader, which he doesn't know yet is his father. The dark side. He knows that's inside of him too. And he uses his anger and aggression to kill Darth Vader, cuts off his head, and it's his own head. And he's shaken to the core. But he's also being initiated. And what's interesting in the myth is there, if you remember the storyline, there's a later scene where he meets Darth Vader. Again, they fight. Darth Vader cuts off his hand, and Darth Vader says, come onto my side. And he remembers his initiation. He says, no, I will never do that. In this initiation, Luke faced the unknown. He faced the fear, and he faced death. He failed this test. He took in his anger and aggression. But it's okay, because it's part of his training. He passed the test when it really counted. Now, I want to speak about two last things today. I want to speak about my own feelings as I watch this movie, and then I want to turn to how this sets up Jesus' initiation. I remember watching this movie in my early 20s, and something literally just erupted so deep inside of me as I watched Yoda and Luke. It's like I just so identified with Luke. I wanted a man to come for me and initiate me and coach me and take me into the ways. And I didn't have this language for it then. Take me into the ways of the heroic, of the truly masculine. I didn't have the language, but I could just feel something so powerful, almost uncontrollable, almost untamable inside of me as I watched this story. And as I said, the great stories pull these deep things up inside of a man. Even if he doesn't have language for it, he knows there's something here that's true and right and good. Later I learned what that was. But I still had a lot of confusion, because when I turned to my faith, it's like I didn't see any sense of initiation. I didn't understand. I was like, perhaps the Lord really doesn't understand the heart of a man. I had a tremendous amount of confusion about this for years. And then one day it hit me like a thunderclap. It was like, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. It's just like all of a sudden the clouds parted. It is an initiation. In fact, it's the greatest initiation ever conceived of in human history. This is not initiation into manhood. This is initiation into the new man. Jesus came to save the world by his sacrificial propitiatory death. But in doing so, in how he's going to save it, he set up a new manhood. Paul says he's the new Adam. You know, there's two places you can be in the human race. You can be in the old Adam or you can be in Christ. That's it. They are the two heads. One head is leading the race one place, and the other head is pioneering into another place. And Paul says he is the second Adam. He's the new one. Where Adam failed, he succeeded. And he wants to lead a host of men and women, but we're speaking about masculinity here, behind him into this new place. And the initiatory rite is baptism. And it just all of a sudden, it just all sort of coming together. It's like, of course, baptism. You know, and what I remember my reading about baptism is like back then, water, particularly, like the Sea of Galilee, the reason why the disciples were so terrified of the storms, people didn't know how to swim back then. There were life jackets. When you got in the water like that, it's like there's a good chance you're going to drown, you're going to go under. And there was this terror of the water, of going down into the water, into the death. And Paul, in his inimitable way, in Romans 6, ties these themes of baptism, initiation, and death together in this one sentence. Therefore, we were buried with him, with Christ, by baptism into death, in order that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, so too we may walk in newness of life. This is death. You're going to die. Something has to be killed inside of you. And baptism is a sign and a seal of that this is going to happen. This is your initiation. It's an initiation that cuts deeper than any other. But you're not going to die. No. The exact opposite is going to happen. You're going to become more alive than you could have ever imagined. That's a surprise. That was the surprise of the resurrection. Jesus pioneered that. And our lives are in some sense to become an echo of that in this life. And then, of course, even more of an echo of that when we enter into the life to come. Now, I want to move to Jesus' words in Mark that explicate this a bit clearer. And he simply looked at the crowds, and this is after he had told the disciples that he was going to be his first prediction of his death. And he says to them in Mark 8:34, if anyone wants to follow after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. It's difficult for us, removed from those historical times, to understand how shocking and almost blasphemous, almost sacrilegious, almost profane those words were to those hearers. The word cross was a word associated with such shame and horror that people didn't like to even say the word in public. And here Jesus is now making this a central tenet. You really want to come after me? Here's the deal. You deny yourself. It's not self-annihilation. It's certainly not self-hatred. All of that's more ends up being a self-preoccupation. It's what we talked. It's letting go of that false glory. It is a instead of the gravitational center being my ascent into my own self-constructed heroic story. Like, this is how I conceive my life. It's going to be, this is how I'm going to make it. It's letting all of that go with all of the destructive things about it. Letting that life go and saying the gravitational center of my life is now going to be your will, following your way. And I'm going to let that sink and surrender to that as deeply as I know how. It is death to my agendas and to my best laid plans for security in this life. It's to let all of that go. Whatever you want, Lord, I know that's best, not only for the kingdom, but for me. And then he says, to reinforce that, he uses the idea of a death march, which is what carrying the cross was. Now, all of the entering into the death was not the point. That's the passageway. Remember initiation? It's a passageway. The point of the death talk is not to die. The point of the death talk is to come alive. So how does Jesus finish it? He says, deny yourself, take up your cross, come after me. Remember, as we talked about, rabbis back then would wait until disciples would say, can I come after you? Can I come follow you? And they give their permission. Jesus just looked at people. He looked at the disciples and said, you're coming, follow me. Unprecedented. And now he looks at everybody and says, this is how this thing is going to go down. You want to come after me? This is how it happens. You're being initiated into something very new. You don't even know what this is. You're going to face the unknown, you're going to face the fear, and you're going to face the death. But you'll follow me, trust me. You'll come out more alive than ever. This is the sequence in manhood. All the great heroic stories have been saying the same thing. They're echoes of this now one supreme voice. They're all preparatory. I just want to say, because I want to leave time for discussion, I can speak about this in an objective way, but let me just tell you, the process of entering death is just entering death. It's just ugly. There's nothing I can do to pretty it up and make it seem nicer than what it is. It's just death. And I described in the book my own experience of starting this ministry and the 3 years literally of death I went through. It was a wilderness wandering. And yet, I look back on that now and I go, so thankful. I was being initiated. There were so many things that were dying, that needed to die inside of me. And interestingly enough, as I kept on that path, the Lord was teaching me and coaching me. I was learning to hear His voice and His encouragement. And as I walked out of it, I realized, like all initiation, something deep has shifted inside of me. I am not the same man that I was before. How Jesus calls a man into death and resurrection, how He initiates a man, is different in every man's story. Don't look at my stories like the way it's going to happen to you, or has happened to you, or is happening to you. It's different for every man's story. But when a man truly follows Jesus and says, I want to follow this way, inevitably, it's going to go this path. But the point of initiation is not death. The point of initiation is to come alive as a man. To be a part of the new Adam. And to follow in His footsteps. And to feel Him coaching you ever close to Him. I want to stop here and allow some time for discussion along these points. So, what insight from today's lesson seems most important for you to remember? Something from the book or anything that was said today? You can take up that question. Tell a story of being initiated into something when you had to face the fear and the unknown. Just tell a story of something you remember from your story. I did the whitewater rafting. I talked about off-trail backpacking. Doing something that was like, oh my, what have I gotten myself into? Tell that story. What questions or doubts do you have about entering death as you follow Jesus? What fears? What hopes?